Okay, so I am hoping everyone can hear me. Can we get a sense of whether everyone can? We've had some technological problems, so I'll ask for your question for take a little bit of time to set things down. I'm trying to juggle both the computer and the telephone for the impact. Okay, so Saguna, can you please just let me know how to come? It's a bit weird to ask how to watch myself on video, but basically what I'm asking you guys. How I'm here on the hi Amrita. Yeah, okay. So I just need to also be able to connect on my laptop Facebook, so that I can actually follow like what if there are any questions and so on. Okay, I think actually maybe I can do it from the phone. Okay, so I'll start, and if you guys, whenever you have any questions or anything, please just chip in. I am still hoping that I will be able to see the questions etc. on my laptop, so I will leave the laptop on for that, and in the meantime I'll begin. So my name is Farah Ghuznavi. I am a Bangladeshi writer, and I think some of you already perhaps either online or also perhaps at the Nepali Fest some years ago. So it was very nice for me when I heard from Saguna, who invited me to participate in this event. It's a great honor, but it's also a great pleasure, because from when I was quite young, I think the first time I went to Nepal was maybe, hi, Polly, glad to see you there. From the first time I went to Nepal, when I was, 12 years old, it has always had a very special place in my heart. And as an adult, I took every opportunity. I have been taking every opportunity to go back, which is why I've met some of you at the NCL Fest. And I must say that in all that time, every time I have been to Nepal, I have felt very much at home. I feel that the Nepalese, South Asia, we are generally hospitable people, but I think Bangladesh is very hospitable, and I think Nepal is, to me at least, Nepal has been exceptionally hospitable. So I thank all of you for all of the good times I have spent there. I hope to spend more good times there in future, and also for this opportunity to revisit that, because I haven't been able to go back the last 5 years. Things have been very hectic. So I hope that sometime in the near future there will be an opportunity to go back and perhaps meet some of you in person also. So let me start by telling you a little bit about my writer's journey. From when I was quite a young child, I had a very vivid imagination, sometimes too vivid, like I would lie in bed and imagine terrible things at night. But some of it was also good, because I was not an only child. I have an older brother, but he's 8 years older. So by the time I came along, by the time I was like 6, 7 years old, he was already away in boarding school in Darjeeling. So I grew up a little bit like an only child. And my family is a little bit strange in the sense that I don't have lots of cousins living in Bangladesh. My family is, actually, as Nepalis, you will all understand this, my family is spread all over the world. So I don't, my cousins and I, some of us are close, but we have not been able to spend years and years together in that sense. So my companion during those years were basically books, books of any kind that I could get hold of. And of course the internet and Kindle are a huge bonus now, but when I was growing up, I was in this permanent state of what is called a bibliophobia, which is, I think, a wonderful word. And what it means is someone who is scared of running out of books, because I can promise you until the age of 20, I was continually scared of running out of books to read. So sometimes, I would find people who had very good personal libraries, and then I would be extremely charming, or as charming as I was capable of being, in order to make friends with them, and hopefully in the hope that they would allow me to borrow something from their libraries. We had just the British Council Library in Dhaka at that time, and I remember when I first went there, I was maybe like 12 or 10 years old. My dad took me, and I was amazed at the concept that you could borrow 4 books at a time. I don't think there was like 1 week passed. It's quite far away from my home, but I don't think 1 week passed without me nagging my parents into taking me there. And the most exciting thing was when I was maybe that's when I was 12. Yeah, maybe I started when I was 8, and you could borrow 4 books, and then as a teenager you could borrow 8 books, and then it was like amazing. And then of course my bibliophobia kicked in, and to my horror, by the time I was about 15, I had read my way through all the parts of the library that interested me. So that was a very bitter experience for me. And I think the wonderful thing about books for me was that, you could just be anyone. When you were reading a good book, you could become somebody else. You could travel anywhere you wanted. You could travel through time if you wanted to know how people lived in earlier times. You could do anything. The things that you would never have a chance to do in your real life. Growing up in Dhaka. Dhaka was a nice place to grow up. We didn't have major traffic problems at that time, and I remember it as being a much leafier and safer city than it is today. But it was a good place to grow up. I have no complaints about that. But we did deal with this chronic shortage of books. So I think, yeah, so I read a lot. And in fact, I'll tell you a secret. I had a terrible fear as a child, and also, like when I was 12 or 13 or whatever, I had a terrible fear that I would never do anything as exciting as the things that I read about. I would never have that kind of life, And I remember when I was 18 or something, actually thinking, what if I never do any of these things? What if the only way I experience these things is by reading? And then I thought, you know what? At least I get to experience them by reading. And I think that's what books at their best do for us. They just, whether you're living in lockdown and having a hard time, whether something terrible has happened in your life and you're struggling to get through it, whether it's a divorce or a loss or whatever it is, books are a great consolation for many of us. I think they are a great consolation. So, and as a writer, I never thought I would be a writer, to be honest. I think probably as I was growing up, I viewed writers in the way that many people view pop stars, whether it was Enid Blyton or whoever I was reading at whatever stage. They were just like magical creatures to me. I think writers were like unicorns in my mind. I wasn't sure they actually existed, Who were the people behind the books? This will sound very strange to a generation that's growing up with free access to the internet. But of course, we didn't have these things then. You had maybe like a newspaper with a blurry picture of and even those were like celebrities. Writers were not celebrities in those days anyway. Even now, very few are. But you just had a blurry picture, and you had maybe a little bit of type about the story that they were working on or whatever. So it was a very distant kind of connection to the writer. You had a connection to the story, of course. Anyone has a connection to the story when they're reading, hopefully if it's a good book, but not to the writer. The writer was someone behind the scenes in a way, and like I said, someone that I thought of as being like a unicorn, some distant magical creature that you never really saw, but produced something wonderful that you could enjoy and relate to and really get something out of. And for myself, I think I would say first started writing anything for myself probably when I remember at the age of 7, writing truly terrible poetry. Even for a 7-year-old it was bad, So I should have known at that stage that I was never going to be a poet. But I was still at the age when you have some confidence in your abilities. Life hasn't knocked your corners off. So I used to write this dreadful poetry, and I would very proudly show it to my parents, to my family, to anybody who would tolerate listening to me. So yeah, Bibek, I will definitely come to that. Can you just tell me what you mean about early writing career? You mean like when I first started, or do you mean sort of the very beginning of... Anyway, I'll come to that, I promise. So yeah, and I have no recollection of this, but I recently got a message from 2 of my young nieces. I call them my nieces, but my cousin was a lot older. So when I was maybe 13 or 14, they were perhaps 9 or 10, something like that. It's not a big age gap. But anyway, one of them was telling me, she said, I remember when we were little and you used to tell these wonderful stories. And we really were excited when you would come to visit because you would tell us stories. In all honesty, I don't think the stories could have been very wonderful because I was only about 12. And I don't remember telling them. But it's interesting because obviously it made some kind of impression on her. So maybe those were the early kind of storytelling days and so on. And I didn't actually come to writing fiction until quite late in life, about 15 years ago, I would say. And there is a little story behind that. I don't know if Bibek Adhikari, this is the kind of question you're asking, but as I said, all my life I admired writers. I read voraciously, and I never had the confidence to think that I could write a story. That's the honest truth. I mean, I wrote for one of the newspapers here, the Daily Star. For many years, I used to write pieces for them, journalistic or slice of life kind of pieces. And then I think it must have been in 2005. I was living in Britain at that time. I was doing my second master's degree, sucker for punishment. But anyway, I was there, and then I read this news headline about a young child. Her name was Rupali. She was 10 or 11 years old, and she had been killed by her employer. I'm sure there are stories like this in Nepal as well. There are terrible stories like this in Bangladesh and in other parts of the world about employers who mistreat children who come to work for them. So this child had been sent from the village to stay with his family, and the woman was very, I'll come to that, Bibek, about how this is in fact exactly what I'm about to tell you. So at that time I was writing newspaper columns, but not fiction. And so I spoke to my editor. I called her from London and I said, it's just terrible that the people are, firstly they're hiring these child servants and then they're treating them so badly. And in this particular case, the child died. And she died in a very terrible way, which is that she was beaten, the final time she was beaten by a rolling pin. And it really I told you I have vivid imagination, and it really disturbed me to think of what a wooden rolling pin would do to a child's bones, So I spoke to my editor and she said, why don't you write something about it? And I said, well, the thing is, if I write, it will be like some kind of a piece, a non-fiction piece. And people who are doing things like that, they're not interested in Farah Ghuznavi telling them it's not nice to hit children with rolling pins. You know what I mean? So I told her, get one of the fiction writers, because the magazine had some fiction writers. So get one of them to write a story and tell them to write the story in a way that, maybe the magazine used to be far more widely read than the newspaper, in the sense that even people who were students or housewives or, older people who maybe wouldn't necessarily read the paper on a daily basis used to read what was called the Star Weekend magazine. So it had a huge circulation, and I think it was the highest English language publication that in terms of circulation in Bangladesh. So, it reached a wide range of people. So I told her, she said, yes, okay, I'll speak to one of the fiction writers, they'll do it. And 3 days after that, I was very relieved. I thought, okay, fiction writer will do it, I don't have to think about this. 3 days later, I sat down in front of the laptop and I wrote this story. And it took me about 2 days to write this story. It was about 5,000, 6,000 words. And in all the short stories I've written since that first story in 2005, it's the easiest story I ever wrote. It's probably not the best story I ever wrote, I hope not, but it's the easiest story I ever wrote because it was written in first person, and it was literally as though someone was standing on my shoulder, by my shoulder, and telling me what to write and just dictating it for me, and that's how I wrote it. So I sent it to the magazine, they published it, we got a very good response from the readership. And for me it was wonderful in this sense that, hi Kumar, great to see you. It was wonderful in this sense that for years and years and years and years, I had told myself I couldn't write fiction, And suddenly my outrage and my anger and my sadness led me to write this story. And as I said, it wasn't a brilliant story. It was called A Small Sacrifice. You can read it online. If you Google my name and you Google the story's name, A Small Sacrifice, it's free to read online. And it broke that idea I had that I can't write fiction. I thought, well, I wrote this, so maybe I can write other things too. And that's where it all started. 2005, and I wasn't really thinking about publishing. I think in that sense maybe, of course you want people to read your writing, but publishing was not something that my family or I had any experience with other than the newspaper columns. So I didn't really think about it. For me, it was a question of first writing the stories and then I'll think about the publisher, which is probably still my approach, which is probably why I'm not that well known. But no complaints about that. So I was approached by this lady, Dr. Niaz Zaman, who is a professor at Dhaka University, and she's a literature professor. And she said she was writing a collection of stories from Bangladesh called From the Delta. And she said to me, I read this story of yours in Star magazine. Would you be interested in letting us use it? So I said, of course. The story was written for Bangladeshis. If it can reach a wider audience, I'd be very happy for that. So she published, From the Delta was published in 2005. And there's a lovely little story here. I hope you'll forgive me for taking a little aside. There is someone called Begum Ruqya Sakhawat Hussain, whom perhaps some of you have heard of. She's a great writer and feminist icon, and she's famous for writing a short story called Sultana's Dream, among other stories. And, thank you, Saguna. And Sultana's Dream was a story she actually wrote in English, and many people think the reason she wrote this story in English, because her language of writing was Bangla, was that she wanted it to reach a wider audience. I guess we'll never know for sure, but that story was written in English. The language is maybe a little bit stilted when you read it in 2020, but the message of the story is very, very interesting. And it's about someone falls asleep and then they have this dream about a country called Ladyland, where the Sultana is the women run the country. And basically the person who's there, this person, is saying to the Sultana, how are you doing this? And it's actually, I shouldn't tell you too much about the story. If you're interested, you should read it. It's a very revolutionary concept, and I think it's very interesting that she could have written that story such a long time ago. So the interesting thing here is that in From the Delta, basically, this was accidental. The stories covered in there, they had to be all originally written in English. There are no translations. And the stories spanned from 1905 to 2005. My story was the last one, published in 2005. So it's the last one in the book. And the first one in the book is Sultana's Dream, Begum Ruqya Sakhawat Hussain. We call her Begum Ruqya in Bangladesh. We also have a special day that celebrates her because she was a pioneer in Muslim girls' education, and she set up a school in Kolkata, which I believe is still open. So anyway, so her story was written in 1905, and then this will confess my ignorance, but it's the truth. So then my father, when he saw this book, he's a great reader. So he saw this book and he said, "Oh, how lovely, Begum Ruqya's book. Hi Arjun, hi Chandrasekhar, hi Vishwa. This book," he said, "it's so lovely. Did your editor know the family connection?" So I said, "What family connection?" And he said, "With Begum Ruqya." So I said, "No, she didn't know it because actually I don't know it. What's the family connection?" And to cut a long story short, Begum Ruqya was born into a zamindar family in the north of Bangladesh, Rangpur, the area is called. And she was, she married at a young age, as was the practice in those days. But her eldest sister, Karimunnisa Khanum, was one of the first Muslim poets in Bangla. And I believe the first female Muslim poet in Bangla. Ruqya was her younger sister. And in some of her writing, Ruqya has actually dedicated some of her books to this older sister, Karimunnisa, and her older brother, Ibrahim Sabir, who also encouraged her very much. Because in those days, girls from Muslim families, mainly educated families, learnt, I believe, Persian and Arabic, but not Bangla in that sense. So it was of course they spoke it, but it was not the language of education or writing for them. So she wrote in Bangla. And the crux of the story is that that older sister of Begum Ruqya's, Karimunnisa Khanum, is actually my great-great-grandmother. So she is buried in our family graveyard in Tangail. And so there was this very lovely coincidence where Ruqya was the first person in that book and I was the last person. And at this 100-year kind of thin thread connecting us, which I think it was a wonderful thing for me to learn, at least, as you can imagine. So that is how it started. Vivek, I'm coming back to your point. It was the book was published in 2005. I was working full time, so it took me quite some time to really prioritize my writing in that sense. I still haven't, actually, to tell you the truth, because life keeps getting in the way. And now the lockdown, I believe for many people is a very, in a way, many people complain that they're bored and they have too much time. And I'll tell you the honest truth, I wish I was bored and I had too much time. But I'm responsible for a household where there are 8 other people, and I'm the one who is supposed to make sure that everyone stays safe, or try to make sure that everyone stays safe and well. So I won't bother you with my domestic details, but it doesn't, let me just say, it doesn't leave much time to write. Despite that, I have recently been able to finish one story, and I'm working on another one. So please keep your fingers crossed for me that I managed to finish this. So after that first book was published, it was some years before the next, I'm trying to think, I think the next publication was actually almost by accident. It must have been around 2008, yeah, 2008, and a story called Escaping the Mirror, which is about to be republished in an anthology from Speaking Tiger Books in India. That was published by a press in the US, a small press in the United States. And that was also very good for me, because I thought, oh, the writing actually has some relevance to a wider world. I wasn't sure if, for me, writing stories about this part of the world is very important, because I feel like, for me personally, authenticity is very important. I've read a lot of stories from here, and here meaning not just Bangladesh, but Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and I think often the stories are lacking. There are some brilliant writers who are writing from this region, including from Nepal, but there are some, I can tell you from personal experience, for example. It's interesting, Uday, you asked this question, because of course in Bangladesh my readership is small, just as in Nepal. I'm sure it is also for English language writers, but there are people who read and enjoy literature in English, so there is a readership. I would be the first one to say that the tradition of literature in Bangla is far richer than anything we have in English as yet. And I always try to encourage and, if possible, put people in touch to try and translate Bangla literature. People like Selina Hussain and so on, who are just brilliant, Shaheen Akhtar, brilliant writers. But translation is also a very sticky business. If a book is not well translated, it does not do justice to the writer. So I'm in fact now working on trying to translate my own, finding someone to translate my own collection, Fragments of River Song, into Bangla. But for me, English is the language I choose to write in, and the reason is very simple. If I just explain it to you, when I was 4 or 5 years old, my parents moved to Britain for a year, and that was the year that I first went to school. So the first alphabet I learned was actually English. It was just a coincidence, but that was the reality. And then when we moved back to Bangladesh a year or so later, I was put into a Bangla medium school. My education is actually in Bangla medium, it's not English medium. Not until I went to university in Britain, then I was studying in English again. Until then, I studied everything in Bangla. But all of my reading was in Bangla, in English, sorry, as I told you, because, now there are many translations of good stories in Bengali, but at that time there were not. So everything I wanted to read was in English. So inevitably that shaped my literary psyche, if that's not, I'm not sure if that's a phrase, but anyway. And so my stories also came to me in English, and that's primarily the why of writing in English. We have newspapers and we have some magazines and so on, and a couple of presses which do English language literature, but it's not the easiest to write. And of course there are always, but then there are critics for everything now. So there are always critics who say, why don't you write in Bangla? And my point is there are many people who can write Bangla far better than I can. So I think it's best to leave that to them and write my stories the way that I feel most comfortable writing them. So that was 2008, and then basically my first collection was published in 2013 by Daily Star Books. Some of you may have read it, Fragments of River Song. And then again life took over. So now I am approaching, touch wood, where's the wood? The finishing line, or at least I can see the finishing line of the second manuscript. So I'll be looking for a publisher for that one, and so I hope that if everything is on track, and that's a very big if, because my life is very good at being interrupted by other things. Maybe 2021 could be when we see the second. It will be another short story collection, and then after that I will think about the possibility of writing something longer. I have to say, with a novel, I wonder if part of this is also like my fear for the longest time that I couldn't write fiction. I think is also like my fear that I cannot write a novel. I don't know. Let's hope that if I actually translate this, if I actually attempt this, it will be finished and be readable. We'll see. But before I get to that, I have a lot of short stories still kind of popping around in my head, and I always worry until I get the first draft of a story that will I lose it, because if I don't write it in time, often I've lost a lot of stories that way, so I want to get this short story manuscript done, and then hopefully I will look at the possibility of a novel. And I hope that there are some people out there who like short stories, because I think we get a very raw deal as short story writers. It does also take a lot of effort and a lot of imagination, I think, to write a good short story. So the idea, in fact, in a way, I think that the novel forgives a lot, because there's so many pages. If some of it is padding, then people don't notice. But in a short story, they will notice if something is unnecessary or if there is a loose end. So, Guna, I'm very pleased to hear that Mohit Joshi is the person to speak to about translation. I'm very interested in approaching that for sure. I've just found someone, she doesn't know yet that I have read her translation and like it, so I won't say it here, but I've just found someone that I think might be the person to do the translation of Fragments of River Song into Bangla. So I'm very, very excited about that. That's been one of the sort of really good things that's happened in the last couple of months, I would say. That's made me very happy. So so I hope that kind of answers the questions about publication. I've also published a lot of, I've published some, I've been lucky in a way, I've been very, very lucky that some people have liked some of the short stories a lot. So I've been lucky in the sense that once you publish a short story, usually no publisher wants to republish it. So, and it's very frustrating, because it's like if you publish in Bangladesh or if you publish in India or wherever, it's not going to reach a wider audience. So, I mean, wider meaning like wider world audience necessary. India itself, South Asia in itself is its own audience, So I'm very appreciative of the fact that there has been interest in my writing in South Asia. But I don't understand why publishers won't republish. So I've been very lucky in that sense, very fortunate. 2 stories in particular. Somebody is selling it on Amazon, but Kamala, nice to meet you. Ramesh, nice to meet you too. But if you're interested in the book, I would be happy to check I won't charge you anything beyond the publisher's price, and if we find out what, I have mailed some copies from Bangladesh, registered mail, and it's reached everyone. So if you'd like an autographed copy, personalized copy, Kamla, let me know. Otherwise, I think there is someone who is selling it on Amazon, but it's more expensive there. But entirely up to you, no problem. Okay, Amrit, I'll come to that in a sec. My brain is frying, trying to stay on track with all these wonderful questions from people. So, I've been lucky with some of the stories, 2 in particular, Getting There, which I think some of you have also read because Saguna kindly published the link on bOOkahOlics website. So that story has been published so far, I think 5 or 6 times, which is very unusual in that sense. So I've been very fortunate, and it's been published in the UK, in the US, in Bangladesh, and India, and in Nigeria of all places, which I think is quite cool in a Pan-African anthology. So I've had individual stories be published in different anthologies, and I'll admit to you a small pleasure of mine, which may sound a little bit juvenile, but it gives me a lot of joy, is I love it when a story is published in a new country. So this year, 2 months ago, for the first time, I've had something published in Austria. And prior to that, I've had let me see, UK and US, as I told you, France and Germany, and now Austria, Canada, and what else? And Bangladesh, India, and Nepal, and Singapore. So that makes me very happy also. And beyond that, you know, it's very hard to publish short stories, I would say, to find a publisher for a book of short stories. So there I can't really advise any of you, except to say that, you know, if publication is very, very important, then write a novel first, because that is what you will find. A good novel will find a home much quicker than a book of short stories, whether it's good or not, you know. So that's my publication advice, such as it is. As some of you may know, in 2013 I was also writer in residence with Commonwealth Writers website, and yes, Kumar, that is the story that I gave you after the interview. I'm so glad that you have liked that story. I have very good memories of that interview with you. Such a pleasure to be in Kathmandu and have that wonderful conversation about stories and literature with you. Sorry, lost my train of thought there for a sec. So yeah, so publication. So I wrote one. I was asked to write a series of articles for Commonwealth Writers website. I think it must have been nine articles. And to my amazement, they paid me for it, which was, I would have frankly done it for free, but they paid me for it. It was wonderful because it also reached all over the Commonwealth. So that was really a tremendous privilege for me. But one of those articles is about publication. I don't consider myself really in a position to advise provide much publication advice, because that has been something that I've tried my best. I've sent things out. Sometimes it's taken, sometimes it's not. You know, you really can't tell. And I'm not one of those writers who is very diligent or very intelligent about networking or anything of that nature. I'm not good with I'm not good with self-promotion, I think. So that's a disadvantage to be a writer in 2020. I love conversations like this. I have all the time in the world for them, but I cannot tell you why you should buy my book, and I don't think I should even try. So we leave that aside. Let me see about the questions. Somebody else had asked something. I just want to see. Amrita, okay, so what do I think makes a good story? This is an interesting question and a kind of eternal question, but in a way, anything makes a good story. Because I think what makes a story good lies less in the plot or in the story itself and more in the telling. Because if you think about it, you know, somebody said there's nothing new under the sun, and I think that's true. We write so many of the same themes. You know, we write love, we write sorrow, we write anger, we write hatred, we write pain. It's the same things that we write about. And even if you take a particular kind of story, if you write about a marriage falling apart, if you write about the joy of falling in love, these are, how many times have these stories been written as a novel or in a short story? Yet we write them again. And some of those stories we remember. And some of those stories we recommend to others. And so many of them are just forgotten. So I think what makes a good story is the telling of the story. And then within that, of course, if you're lucky enough to have an unusual theme or a really good idea, then that's fantastic. You know, that's speaking for myself, I'll say many of my stories, I think, just come from life. They're not real stories in the sense that I don't write, whether it's about myself or about other people, I don't write true stories. But what I do write is stories that, when I was talking about authenticity earlier, what I meant was that a story may not be true, but it has to be, in my mind, it has to be that it could have been true. It has to be convincing. If it is set in India, if it is set in Bangladesh, if it is set in Nigeria. Somebody recently was talking about Chimamanda Adichie's book, Purple Hibiscus. I think it was Sayara based, which is one of my favorite first novels, and a wonderful, wonderful novel. And the thing is that she makes you inhabit that character, Kambili. You know, you feel like you understand everything she's feeling. And yet the storyline itself, I won't go into spoilers, is not something that unusual. It is about a family where there are certain dominating characters, a family where the children are treated a certain way, the spouse is treated a certain way, the public, which is true for very many of our countries, I think, that the public persona becomes very important. You know, what do people think is the quest of your family, of your reputation, is one of the driving factors of that of that story. So just moving up a little bit to see. Yeah. Namaste Silky Moon. Hi Indra. So I think the question becomes that how are you telling the story? And what makes a particularly good story, in my opinion, is how relatable that protagonist is. See, now in Getting There, which I was talking about, one of the things that was very interesting for me, I thought of it as a story that's very firmly grounded in Bangladesh. It's about a young architect who has a difficult family life with her natal family. So she gets the opportunity to move away from her home city, which is Chittagong, a port city in the south, very prosperous but very conservative. And she moves to Dhaka and she goes to university here on scholarship. And then there is a family incident, which means that she has to go back to Chittagong. And it's about her own kind of issues about returning to that family when she has changed so much. And of course, she's going back as an adult. So she then realizes that some of the things she believed about her family were maybe seen through her eyes in a much younger lens, and they maybe were not exactly the way she thought. So for me, that story is a very Bangladeshi or a very South Asian story. I didn't write it to appeal to the wider world, and I didn't particularly think it would. But then it won an award in 2011. Oxford University had a competition, a festival, and I sent it in there, and it came second in that. That's why it got published in the UK, actually. And so that story, yeah, so I thought, okay, then I thought somebody at Oxford University liked it. But, you know, universities are not a typical place in that sense. People who tend to go there tend to be more interested, I hope, in the wider world maybe than someone who hasn't had those opportunities. But so then what was very interesting was I got a message from a professor in the US who was teaching world literature. And she asked me, I edited a book called Lifelines, which some of you may have come across. I'm still trying to persuade Zuban to republish this book because it has been sold out for a very long time. And now Chicago University Press has republished the book, but it's not easily available in South Asia, which I think is terrible. I think it is available on Amazon maybe as an ebook by Zuban, but it's not available in the physical copy at the moment. I will keep pushing for this. So anyway, that collection has 15 stories from Bangladesh. One of them is my story Getting There, and the other 14 are by other Bangladeshi writers. So this professor contacted me and she said she would like to take 3 of the stories from this collection. Yeah, Ms. Chetri, I'm glad you agree. Sorry, where was I? Yes, she contacted me and she said, oh, thank you, Sudeep. I think this is the question you've just asked me. What makes a parochial story appeal to a global audience? That is what I'm trying to answer now, or at least according to my limited experience of it. So this professor in the US, she's a Bangladeshi, but long an expatriate, contacted me and said she wanted to take 3 of the stories from Lifelines for this course of hers. So I asked the 3 writers and they all said yes. And then a few days later, she said she wanted to take Getting There as well. So I was very happy. And I said, of course, yes. And this was taught at this world literature course alongside people like Jhumpa Lahiri and Tolstoy. So, you know, it was kind of shocking for all of us to be part of any course like that, however low down we were on the curriculum. And then this lady, she contacted me after the course was completed, and she said that she had told the students that they had, I'll try and get to your question, Polly, after this. The ebook of Fragments of River Song is not available because I have not yet had a chance to put it on Amazon. It's one of the things on my to-do list, Chetana. But I think the physical book is available. You can write to me directly, like, as I told Kamala, and we can organize it. Or I think maybe bOOkahOlics in Nepal, it's called bOOkahOlics, I think, right? I think they might still have a handful of copies, so you might be able to get it there. Yeah, so she said to me that after she had taught the course, she had told the students, who were all, I guess, you know, mostly American students, mostly young, you know, hang on to that question, Silky Moon Ree, I will come to that in a second. Yeah, so she said that she told the students that they could choose one character from all these books that they had read or all these short stories and write about that character, what appealed to them. And what was amazing to me was that some of them actually chose getting there. And what was even more amazing was that too, I told you, there's the character who's the architect, who is, just, Indira, we will work that out also. I'll give you my email address afterwards. If you can contact me, we'll figure out the cheapest way of getting the book to you, to any of you who are interested. So to my amazement, the main character in my mind is, gosh, there are so many questions here, and why do I not have a pen so I can scribble them down? Just give me 1 sec, okay? And I will come back to this. Okay, so to my mind, the main character is the architect, who is almost 30, and but she's the 14-year-old niece in that story. It's a conversation between the two of them that is the main focus of the story. And a lot of these people, these youngsters who chose getting there, they chose that character, Yasmin, the 14-year-old. So that was also very interesting, very fascinating for me, because I thought, as a writer, you write a story, you put it out in the world, or you give it to a reader, and it brings me to this point that I think that every reader makes a story their own. As a writer, you've written your version of it and you send it out. But it's fascinating to me when somebody reads a story, and of course some people won't like it, but it's fascinating to me that of the people who like it, if hopefully someone likes it, the story that they read is very much their own, because they read it through their own lens. We each read stories through our own lens, our own experiences, our own families, our own thoughts of how things are or how they should be. And that's why, Sudeep, that's a good idea. I think maybe the Q&A can wait till the end. But I mean, I don't really have a fixed series of things that I necessarily want to talk to you guys. So we'll see how it goes. So I think each reader makes it their own. And I think as a writer, it's fascinating to listen to what a reader's analysis or an interpretation of a story is. And that's why I say that, it's not my story anymore. It's their story. And I believe that for the stories that I have read, like To Kill a Mockingbird, which is one of my favorite books ever. The way that I see Jem and Scout and Atticus, I'm sure it has things in common with what the writer intended, but I think probably there are also things that I see in that book that maybe she didn't intend. So very quickly to finish up on this point, one of the people who wrote to me, or rather not wrote to me, but wrote about getting there and that character Yasmin, she said, I have never heard of Bangladesh, and I don't know where Bangladesh is. I don't know anything about this country. But this woman's, actually she was talking about Leila, the architect. She said, this woman's relationship with her father reminds me so much of my relationship with my father. So I think the question is, when the question comes of how do you move beyond parochial, I don't know that you have to do it intentionally. I think basically certain themes are universal, and if you write about them from the heart, then I think it will touch the heart of somebody else who reads it, wherever they are. And not everybody, because as I said, every story is not for everyone, but it will find the readers for whom it's intended, the readers who want to read that story, and then it will mean to them what they want to take from it. Okay, so I hope that makes sense on the parochial question. I'm going to give like 1 second because I don't really want to dwell on this question from Samba Dhakal, which is why Bangladeshis banned Taslima Nasreen and her writing. I think that was a decision from the government, and I think all of our governments in this region, perhaps Nepal does not, I don't know enough, but certainly India, Pakistan, they choose to ban certain books. And why people ban books, you're asking the wrong person. I'm not the one who banned it. So when you write about topics that are controversial, and when you write about topics that relate to religion, then I think you know that you will have a strong reaction from some people. And I think the writer who chooses to do that, hopefully, makes an informed choice and does that. And then they live with the consequences, and they also gain the benefits or the fame that come with that. So that's all I'm going to say about that. If it's okay, I don't know how we're doing on time, Mohit, or if someone could tell me if I don't want to go over time and hold you guys back. There were just a couple of things I wanted to say about the writing process. Just give me 1 minute. I'm going to look at Uday. Just very quickly to touch on this. How is the relationship between native Bangladeshi writers and writers writing in English? I can't speak for other people. I think there are probably some tensions that do exist. For myself, I don't feel those tensions because very frankly, I have made it a point to try and promote the writing of those who write in Bangla. As I've already said, I admire many of them very much. And for example, when I was invited to the Times of India Literature Festival a year or two ago, I was asked to suggest some other writers, and two of the writers I suggested were people who write in Bangla, Anisul Haq and Selina Hussain. So I have personally not experienced any significant tensions of this nature myself. And I think there doesn't need to be a tension, frankly. I think as writers, for all of us, there are questions of insecurity and there are questions of ego, and someone can have a great success and then you think, oh, why did this person get that success? I think in those situations, it is best to try to do two things. One is to, if you can't be happy for them, then at least have the grace to congratulate them and wish them well. I think we should all do that. And I would say that when somebody likes the writing of a Bangladeshi writer, whether it's in English or in Bangla, the way that I see it, it benefits all of us because it creates a bit more of an interest in writing from Bangladesh, other writers from Bangladesh. So you may well benefit if somebody likes the writing of someone from Nepal, it might lead them to look for other writers from Nepal. I don't think it has to be always competitive. I think there is a natural kind of, I think competition is the wrong word. That's why I'm deliberately not using it. I think there are issues of insecurity and there are issues of sadness because this is a competitive field and it's hard to be noticed and it's hard to be, to reach out, especially if you're not somebody who has the connections or if you don't have, if you're not very good at selling yourself. It can be very hard. It's a lot about luck. Who do you know? When did the book come out? What is the theme? These also sometimes feed into success. Sometimes it's also about how you look. It's a reality. They want photogenic writers. Not just for the back jacket, but for maybe that's truer for women than men, but I think it's generally true. So there are a lot of factors that come into play. But I would be happy. I would be very, very happy to see more native Bengali writers getting interest from the international audience because I think there's a huge pool of talent there. And I don't think that if they are getting that attention, I don't think it takes anything away from those of us who are writing in English. So as I said, I think it's a false tension, but that's just my opinion. Okay, looking back so I don't miss anything. I'll be ready to continue in a minute. I'm glad you guys are being patient with me. I think the earlier questions have mostly been answered. If they've not been answered, please be kind and send me the question again. I'm going to try and take the more recent questions now, and then I'll get into some of what I would also like to say. To answer Silky Moon Ree, I think Bangla is one of the sweetest languages in the world. I am very biased, I acknowledge that. I love the sound of Nepali also, just so you know. But I think it is a beautiful language, and I think it's a very mellifluous language. Also the version we speak in Bangladesh, because it's a soft language to the ear, which I love, and it is my mother tongue. So for that reason also. So I don't write in Bangla primarily because, as I said, what comes to me more naturally is the English. But I wish I did. I wish my Bangla is not bad. I am bilingual in that sense, and my education, as I told you, is in Bengali. And actually one of my greatest achievements, in my own opinion, because when I came back from Britain, I had to learn Bangla from scratch in a family where my parents grew up in British India, so English is their first language too. And they didn't believe in tutors, so I had the most terrible time trying to adjust to the school. And my grandmother, who had a very wicked sense of humor, said to me, oh, this is Bangladesh now, this is not East Pakistan. So if you don't learn to speak Bangla very well and very quickly, the police will come and get you. I was about 6, I believed her, you know what I mean? Anyway, there's a story that is roughly based on her in Fragments of River Song called the Guava Tree Rebellion, because she was a very memorable character to me. She was widowed in her 30s with 9 children, and she managed to raise her children and make 6 sons and 3 daughters, and they all had a good education. And she was a really exceptional person. But she was not like other grandmothers. She was not sweet and cuddly. She was very, very sharp, and she was very, very funny. And she challenged you a lot. but she gave me a lot of new experiences, particularly with regards to, she was very good with animals and with plants and with cooking. So I had a lot of my first taste of many things, and my love of animals, I think, partly comes from her. So just scrolling down. So what are the aspects? Okay, Polly, can you clarify what you mean about the aspects of being a writer? Or do you mean what qualities you need to have? I think, because very briefly, I think imagination is the most important one. Because, we write from experience, certainly, but if you only write from experience, you have one person's experience. That's not a lot of, even if you've had a very rich life, and I'm very grateful for some of the things I've seen and experienced, even if I didn't enjoy them at the time. I thank God for giving me so much inspirational material, but I would also thank Him to give me some time to write those stories. But the point is, experience is limited for anyone, no matter how fortunate or widely traveled or whatever you are. So I think the two most important qualities for a writer, and I hope I'm answering your question, Polly, is a very vivid imagination and a good memory. Because I think one of a writer's strongest tools is memory. Because you think back to things that you have heard, that you have seen, and then your imagination takes off from there and creates the story. At least that is my own experience. For example, I'd like to tell a story about one of the short stories. It's in Fragments of River Song also, and it was also chosen for the best Asian short stories book in 2017. Monideepa Shahu was the editor of that, and she did the most fantastic job of selecting the stories. They went right across Asia, from Japan to the Middle East, which is my definition of Asia, not just South Asia or Southeast Asia. So there's a story in there called Big Mother, Barima. And the reason, I'll tell you something that people don't generally know now. The inspiration from this story initially came to me from a young Nepali woman, a very dear friend of mine. I don't know if she managed to join this session, I suspect not. But I had known her for 2 years, and then she told me a story about her family where her father had 2 wives. It's a Hindu family, but the father had 2 wives. And so she grew up with 2 mothers, Barima and Chotema. And, she told me about, and of course it was a very interesting story, but in some ways it was a very sad story also, because of course of the tensions in that kind of family. And from that idea of a girl who grows up with 2 mothers, and one is more powerful than the other one, Barima is the one who is powerful, I got the idea of writing the story. Now the story itself has nothing in common with my friend's story. I showed her the story long before I showed it to anyone else. And I said, this is the idea came from you, but it's not your story. I put nothing that's personal to you in it. And she was very generous, and she liked the story, and she said, okay, you can use it. And I set the story in Bangladesh. I set it in a Hindu family because polygamy is very unusual in Hindu families in Bangladesh. It's not common for Muslims either, because even financially it's not very viable. But this is a misconception I think many people have actually, but it's not true. So the story is set in Bangladesh, and everything that happens is related to some real events in Bangladesh. The collapse of the Rana Plaza building and the factory and various things like that. But it was fantastic to me that I heard this story from my friend, and it just totally took off, So I think it's somewhat about experience. It's hugely about imagination, and then elements of my own memory come into these stories, because of course I am shaped by my own experiences and my own memories of someone. So very often what I find is that something as simple as a phrase or an encounter with somebody gives you an idea, and that is from that idea you basically come up with a story, and the story is something that wasn't there before. The characters or the plot, they were not there before. The main character in my story, Barima, does not have a lot in common with my friend, even in terms of personality, but that was the starting point. So Silky Moon Ree, I hope that answers your question. I think most of my stories, 1 or 2 come from an idea of memory or whatever. There's another story called Waiting, and that is, again, the kernel of the story comes from an experience I had when I was sitting in a car, and I was waiting for someone. The person who was driving had gone to get something from a shop, and I was just watching the street scene, and I saw something there. I saw 2 young children there. And a man walked out of a shop, an adult man, and he was eating a chalk bar ice cream, you know. And I saw those two children watching him. They were street kids. They were beggars. And I saw them watching him, and it really upset me because I was thinking, how can he be so oblivious that he's standing there, an adult man, and he's eating this ice cream, and these two kids are watching him, and probably they've never tasted chalk bars in their life, you know. Like, anyway, so I did something in that story. Sorry, not in the story. I did something on that occasion. I got out of the car and I went across the street. I bought 2 chalk bars. And I was so ashamed, actually. I was so ashamed of all of us who are privileged, and we never think about our privilege very much, you know. Or at least I feel I don't think about it enough, so I shouldn't say it for everyone else. But I think we should think about it more. So I came out and I gave the kids the ice cream. I didn't stop to talk to them because I was feeling very ashamed of myself at that point. That, you know, how many chalk bars have I had in my life? How long have I stopped to appreciate what I have, you know? So I gave it to them and I walked away, and they were, you know, they were kind of like really amazed, I think. So they weren't looking at me, they were looking at the chalk bar, you know. And then I went back to the car on the other side of the street. I got in and I was watching them, and to my horror, the little girl was very little. She was like maybe 5 and her brother was 7, and he was opening his ice cream, and then she was not able to open her ice cream. So this man came out from the shop and he took the ice cream from her. And I thought, oh my God, now I'm going to have to go across the street again and shout at this man and say, it's her ice cream, let it be. And then thank God, he just peeled it open and he gave it back to her. And I saw that the boy, the brother, he took the ice cream wrapper from the man and he folded the 2 wrappers and he put it in his pocket. And then they ate it, and then the person I was waiting for came, we came home. That is like 20 years ago, that incident. And 10 years after that, I wrote this story, Waiting, which has many other characters, and none of the characters really is me. But that little aspect of seeing them watching him, and my decision to go over and do that, which was a very, very small thing, and as I said, I felt very badly about it even at the time, that was where the story sprang from. So I hope that answers the question on ideas and things. So I never know when the idea is going to come. It very rarely comes when someone comes to me and says, I have a great idea for a story you can write. It rarely works. I won't say never. I'm sure at least 1 or 2 things may have come out from there, but not generally, no. Generally, it's something completely unintentional that someone has said, or something I've seen, or I've heard, or a thought that comes to me, and the story just takes off from that. And the characters, yeah, I think the characters are the ones who mostly drive the stories. Like, you know, sometimes you feel like you're just watching or you're listening, and then the story comes together. That's why I say, you know, writers, we are the only ones who hear voices and we're happy about it. You know what I mean? Because we're always hearing some voice or the other. There's a joke about the writer who woke up one morning and said, the voices are back. Yay! You know, so, though, I mean, that's a joke, but I wouldn't joke too much about the mental health of writers. I think there was some study done that showed that we are much more prone to mental health issues, including schizophrenia and bipolar disease. So that's no joke. But yeah, I think writers largely, if you let them, they will, you know, kind of tell you their story, and then you go and write them. That's been my experience. If I like to have just some headspace to think about an idea. If I don't get that, then I lose the story, and I need to write it down. So I think Vivek asked something about the writing process. For me, the writing process, I get an idea. I sit quietly by myself for a while and I just mull it, you know, or I do something really mindless, you know, like washing up or cleaning up or tidying something that doesn't require my attention. And at that point it develops. And in terms of plot, yeah, I sometimes do like a very rough outline, you know, like ideas I will jot down, but I don't, and I have a chronology in my head of what's going to happen, what are the events, but I will honestly admit that sometimes when I sit down to write it, it can go off in quite different directions. I've heard writers say in the past that, oh, you know, you don't know what a character is going to do, and I thought, it's such rubbish. You know, you're the writer, of course you know what the character is going to do. So I'm here to tell you that actually this is true, because I started writing a story a while back, which is about a character, and in my head he was actually a hero. He was a good and upstanding man, and somehow in writing the course of the story he turned into a psychopath. So that was actually that was kind of a slightly disturbing experience for me, because that was not my intention at all. But I do think that the story has ended up much more, much better as a result of that. So I think you need to follow it organically. Things develop organically as you're writing it. And for me, I need to follow that process. If I have a very clear, very rigid idea of what I'm going to write, that doesn't work. I mean, I can write it, but it won't necessarily be a good story. And I think I would describe myself as a combination. I do believe of plotter and pantser. I'm not a pantser in the sense that I don't just sit down and start writing. No, I need to have a kind of outline or a sense of things in my head. But then when I start writing, if it seems logical for things to go in a certain direction, then I'll go there. So I don't mind doing that. Yeah, Saguna, exactly. I can imagine you interpreting Prakash's poem in a very different way than he attended. But I think that's the beauty of it. It's the beauty of writing, and it's the beauty of reading. That, it's such a personal thing. What you get from a story is such a personal thing. Sudeep, I don't think it should be. I don't think a story should be politically correct for the sake of political correctness, but I also don't think a story should be sensationalist for the sake of sensationalism. And let's face it, a lot of them are. I think the story should be true to what your character is and would really do in those life circumstances, in that situation. If that is politically incorrect, then that is what you write. If it is very boring, then that is what you write. I mean, in terms of gender, class, ideology, I don't think there are any limits. I think it depends on whose story you're telling. The stories I'm telling are not my story. I'm not very interesting. So if I was sitting around telling stories about my stories, nobody would be reading them anyway. So I think, I think it's interesting to write a range of characters, but again, that's not something that's a conscious decision. I'll write the character that comes to me. If he turns out to be a psychopath, then I'll write that. I've written, like in Getting There, for example, the character has a very tense relationship with her father. That could not be further from the truth. My father is amazing. He's just, actually so is my mother. They've both been very, very inspirational to me in terms of encouraging me to do things that I think a lot of Bangladeshi parents would have been like, you're going to do what? You've got a master's degree from London and you're going to go and do my first job. My salary, it was 20 years ago, but my salary was 3,000 takas. So, any self-respecting Asian parent will say, what the hell do you think you're doing? But they were like, why are you doing this? And I said, it was with Grameen Bank. I said, I want to have the experiences. I want to travel in the villages. I want to meet people and see how this is making a difference in their lives. And they said, okay, if you can live on 3,000 takas a month. Of course, I lived in our house, so I didn't pay rent. And they said, if you can manage on that, then okay. So I did. I worked as a translator at night, and I earned twice from my non-job what I earned for my job, but it allowed me to do this, to have some fantastic experiences. I worked there 3.5 years, and it's less about the institution and all about the people that I met. In Mosquito Net Confessions, one of the characters there is drawn on a woman I met from Chittagong, a Hindu woman from the fishing community, and it was about her life. So it was. I don't know if this comes to your politically correct thing. So no, I've written characters who are Hindu, who are Muslim, who are Christian. I've written characters who are street children, who are, in fact, in that one very story, there's a middle class person, there's a rich person, and then there's a street child. Whether it worked or not, the reader will have to decide for themselves. But I think your ability to tell the story is limited only by your imagination. The one thing I'll say is, if you write about whatever you write about, from my perspective, it better be convincing. If you're writing about a street child, you should write the way that that reality is, the reality of that life is. Someone like me will not know what the reality of that life is, but I can do some research, I can listen, I can find out, my work has actually given me a bit of an unusual background, because as a development worker, I have, had a wider maybe exposure to people than I would normally have had if I'd gone into a job in a regular bank or in a company or anything like that. But yeah, I think political correctness is irrelevant for what it's worth. But I think authenticity in your characters is everything. And if you write a story for an audience that you think will like the story to be like this, then that's not a story that I want to read. I think I'm sure somebody will want to do that, but it won't be me. So Yeah, how inclusive and welcome is the Bangladesh literary scene to the literature by indigenous people? Not enough, I think. But I think that's true for us across the region. I think we don't give enough space for indigenous voices. I would like to see, we will not be able to understand that literature in the mother tongue, but I think if it can be well translated, it would be wonderful to have the richness of that to add to our wider canon of literature from Bangladesh, not just Bangla literature, but also Chakma or Murong or anybody else who wants to, because that literature exists, but it will not be accessible to us without translation. So to answer the other question also somebody raised about translation, like should translation, can translation do justice? So let me say that I work as a translator as one of my day jobs, but I don't translate literary translations. I don't consider myself good enough. So I like to do translations which are related to development. I do a lot of translations of, for example, village women who are availing of reproductive health services. I do it, their experiences, good and bad, and often very bad, often good depending on who the provider is, or women who work in garment factories, or men who are marginal farmers. So I do a lot of work which is related to research, and I really enjoy that. I find it challenging because for me as a translator, the point is that whatever I translate should reflect the voice of the person who spoke, not my interpretation of what they said. So I think in translation it requires a degree of skill, I think, to work on the nuance and the to convey what that person really means, which is not going to be conveyed in a literal translation. For literary translation, I think it's even harder because you're working with somebody else's voice, somebody else's ideas. But I will say that I think a good translator can do justice. It will never be as good, in my opinion, as the original, as reading it in the original, but so many of us can't read so many literatures we can't read in the original. Do we not want to read those literatures at all? I don't want to be deprived. I would rather have that literature translated into English or into Bangla so that I can read it. So I think translation is a very, very important part of literature. So Sarita, I've already said what I'm going to say on that topic. So I hope that answer suffices. Let me see, what else is there? Yeah, Kamala, I know two wives are illegal, but I think in Nepal, but I think it does happen. When I spoke to my friend, I realized that she told me that it was unusual, but it was she knew other people with a similar kind of experience. So I think a lot of things, as we know in all of our countries in this part of the world, a lot of things are illegal, but that doesn't mean they don't happen. Unfortunately, they do. So I'm very interested in those stories. I'm especially interested in stories from the margin. I was saying earlier that I consider myself very privileged to have worked in development, because I think many of the stories that I've heard, and when I was doing this, I was mostly for the field work, I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and they didn't take me very seriously. I used to have discussions with women's groups, and I made a point of stating that I had to be allowed to speak to them alone. Whatever organization I was working with, we would do the work part of the meeting, and then the staff I would ask to leave me alone with the beneficiaries, whether they were women or women and men or just men or whatever. Because I think people will only speak when they feel like they are not in an awkward situation. So I was considered very young. I was not considered an authority figure. I hope I'm still not considered an authority figure. And so they told me some stories which were, I felt very, very privileged to understand, to be hearing, and I thought, one of the reasons that I write is that I like to. It makes me sad that so many of the most fascinating stories will never be told, because those people don't have access. Sometimes they're not literate. They're highly intelligent, but they're not necessarily literate or highly literate. And even if they are literate, they don't have an audience or an opportunity or the time to tell those stories, And I think the world is poorer for not hearing a wide range of stories. So as a writer, I feel that if I can tell some of those stories, then I am I'm showing my gratitude to those people for sharing their stories with me, for trusting me enough to tell those stories, and hopefully I'm reaching those stories to an audience that might not otherwise hear it, including in Bangladesh. I don't mean overseas or anything like that, including in Bangladesh, because we all live in our little bubbles, don't we? You know, so I think it's good to step out of our bubbles and maybe look into somebody else's bubble once in a while and see how they live. There is I'm sure you all know this, but there is several recent studies which have said that one of the findings that they've had is that those people who read more fiction tend to be more empathetic, perhaps because they are put themselves in the characters. You know, you have to be in the character's head to really enjoy a story or understand it fully. And so they felt that people who read tend to be more empathetic. People who read fiction specifically, they said, tend to be more empathetic. And I think that's true, and I think the world could use as many empathetic people as possible. So for any of us to be able to contribute to that, I think we are lucky to be able to contribute, if we can. I hope in some small way that I am also making some small contribution. In terms of common things in literature from Bangladesh and Nepal, I have read some, but not nearly enough. I think there will be commonalities because so many, unfortunately, probably also so many of the problems that we have in our countries. And I don't want to go into it because I don't want anyone to feel defensive or critical about it, so I'm not going to specify. But many of the problems we have in each of our countries are actually across the region, more or less. They are sometimes less in one country than in others. For example, I will say that I'm not going into the issue of gender violence, but I think on the streets in Kathmandu, women face much less unwanted male attention than they do in some other cities in South Asia. And I salute Nepal for that. In Sri Lanka, I think people can be more open-minded about certain things, perhaps because of the higher rate of literacy. But as we know, education doesn't mean enlightenment, I think. I have met many educated people who say things that are shocking to me in their lack of empathy and in their lack of understanding. So I believe education is part of the solution, but I believe education is not enough. I believe there has to be education, and then there has to be experience. There has to be interest in the lives of others. The more we take an interest in the lives of others, I believe the better we grow as human beings. And I think that's important. If you look at the state of America today and the fact that 1/3 of the population supports someone like Donald Trump, Donald Trump himself does not worry me as much as the support that he has. Donald Trump is a lunatic, in my opinion. And there will always be a small hardcore of lunatics in all of our societies who say and do really terrible things. But it's when there is a significant group in society that supports that kind of thinking that I find sad. And in a country with so many resources, with so much wealth, I find it tragic for the United States. So I don't know why I have a sudden pop-up here. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Saguna. That's a very good point you've made about Rushdie and Chekhov. Let me just see. I want to get a bit further down and see if I'm missing any questions. Any particular time when I experience epiphany? You know what? Absolutely not. It can come at any time. I can be listening to someone talking about something completely different in a group, and suddenly I think of something, and then I don't want to be in that group anymore. I want to go and quickly take the notes down before I forget the idea for that story, Sandeep. So no, but I think when I'm most likely to experience an epiphany is when I can actually hear myself think, which is why I long for time alone, which I don't, I have a shortage of that, and I would like to have a bit more time to think. So, but then, I mean, we make our choices. So if you choose to prioritize family, or if you choose to prioritize certain things, then other things will lose out. I hope that it's been a very difficult couple of years for me on the family front, and so I would like to be able to get back to writing more and being able to follow up on ideas when I have them. That's why I was saying that please keep your fingers crossed for me that the second manuscript actually gets finished. June, I think financial independence is very important. speaking for myself, I would say it's just a continuous struggle to earn enough to pay the bills and have time for writing. So I don't know what the answer is there. I think the best thing is to be independently wealthy if you're able to do that, but I think that's not an option for most of us. So, so I guess the best thing to do might be to have a job that perhaps if you teach, maybe, not literature necessarily, but if you have the summer holidays when you have some free time, if you have, I don't know if you can palm your children off on somebody. I think these are things that, and if, you know, they say women are very good at multitasking. I think that's largely because we have to be, because there isn't much choice. Otherwise, too many things will fall by the wayside. So you find the way to really use a small window of time well. You learn to use it. You learn. I mean, it makes me laugh when a young writer wrote to me and he said, "Oh, you know, I can only write when I'm on vacation." And I thought, the last time I was on vacation, really proper vacation, was about 5 years ago. So I don't think I think you learn to write whenever you can and in whatever bits and pieces you can. And if you're lucky enough to be able to have dedicated writing time, then I'm very happy for you. I think women writers are less often able to do that. But I think many writers do experience problems making time for writing. My guess is it's worse for women. That's the honest truth, because the expectations are higher and the caregiving roles are usually more frequently there for women. Okay, so I don't know what is. There are some discussions going on which I'm not part of, yeah. Let me just see. I think most of the questions have been addressed. So let me see. Maybe I can just say a few more things and wind this up. I have no idea where we are on time. See, this is how badly organized I am. That I don't actually. The clock is not near me, and the phone is with you guys. So what I wanted to say was, speaking this thing about writers and epiphanies and writing and not writing and finding time for writing. There's a wonderful quote by Kafka which I really, really remind myself. It's something like a non-writing writer, meaning a writer who's not making time for their writing, is a monster waiting to, emerge. And I think that is absolutely true. I think there was a question about why I write. I think I write and this is a very personal answer, I can't speak for others. I write primarily in order not to go mad. I have these things wandering around in my head, and the only way I can make the characters leave me alone is by putting them down on paper or through the keyboard on the screen. Otherwise they're just kind of bugging me all the time. And there are some of them who have bugged me for years, and I'm finishing the story now, the story that I started 6 years ago, maybe, like this one that I was telling you about, the character and the character who turns into a psychopath. That story started several years ago, but now I can finally see that I've finished it, because it took a while for all the pieces to come together. And sometimes it does take a while, sometimes it's a waiting game also. I think you can work hard and you can write every day and you can do your best, but I think Pranika, we can definitely discuss it another time, no problem. I'm just speaking from a very personal experience, and I've asked women from India and other women from Bangladesh, and there's a general consensus. Maybe it's just Kathmandu, I don't know. Maybe it's just all of the people I've spoken to, but I will tell you I've spoken to quite a lot of women who feel that they felt less bothered in Kathmandu than they felt in many other places. Maybe those were just individual experiences. Bhutan, I believe, Bhutan and Sri Lanka came out best, but again, I don't know. Those are experiences of people who have shared with me, so I can't speak for those. So I write because I want the stories to leave me alone. I want the characters to leave me alone. And when I haven't had time to write for a long time, which happened last year, and like a year and a half ago, there was an illness, very serious illness in the family, and I was completely tied up with that. And I had 4 story ideas, and I could not write one of them. And since then, in the last 3 months, I finally managed to write one of those 4 stories. I'm struggling to write the second one. It's not coming easily. I know it would have been much, much easier if I could have written it when it came to me, but it wasn't an option then. So I will say that for me it's like clearing my head. I feel physically uncomfortable, and I feel like totally jammed up when I have a story half written. I hate having to leave it half written and then go to dinner or hang out with people or pretend to be a civilized human being, which at the best of times is a challenge for me. So, and one more point I'd like to make about the imagination versus experience thing. If we wrote primarily from experience, I would write only as a woman, and I would write as a relatively privileged. Sorry, the stand decided that it has had enough. Perhaps it's a sign that we should be ending the session. Bear with me for a sec. Yes, okay. And in this one story that I was telling you about, the one with the psychopath character, he is from the Philippines, and the two other main characters are women, but one is from Sri Lanka and one is from also from the Philippines. So these are not experiences I have. These are experiences I imagine. So I think you should not be limited by what you are, but I believe you should not write anything just because you feel like it. You must make sure that what you write is true and accurate to that country, those characters, your people, and the people who live those lives. And in terms of ideas, one more quote that I want to share with you, it's also one of my favorites. It's from Arthur Miller, and I believe a reporter asked him, where do you get your ideas? And he said, I wish I knew, because I'd go there more often. And I think that is really the truth for most of us. So I think I should wind it up now, because although I don't have the clock in front of me, I'm sure all of you have had quite enough of me by now, and hopefully I've answered most of the questions to your satisfaction. If not, if there's anything left, just add the question now, and I'll try and respond to it. Otherwise, maybe we should bring it to my email address for anyone who's interested in talking about the books is my name. It's Farah, Farah, all small case, and then an underscore, and then Ghuznavi, GHUZNAVI @hotmail.com. Okay, so Guna, is that question for me? Because I can see a very hot debate going on about the status of women in Nepal. So can you just clarify if having the guts to mess with what? Not quite sure. Yeah, I think I will. You want me to type it? Mohit, can you please do it? Farah _Ghuznavi @hotmail.com, because I'm not tech savvy enough to be able to talk to you guys and type it, because I'm doing this on my phone, you see. So yeah, so if that's okay. And I think there was also another question about, does my gender influence me or put me at the receiving end of any subjugation? I've been very lucky in my family. My brother and I were raised as equals, and I've been given all the opportunities that I would have wanted to have. I don't assume from that others have had the same experience. So I think it's a bit dangerous to generalize from your own experience, especially if it's a good one. So I think I was raised by a activist mother and a feminist father, and the results are as complicated as you would think. So to finish off, I want to just share one thing with you about why I was so excited to be asked to do this session with you guys. And I know that 99% of the people, I think, here are from Nepal. June, I'm glad you enjoyed the discussion. One of the reasons I think I've always felt so at home in Nepal is because a lot of people, this may not be true, because I can't tell a group of Nepalis this with any authority, but in all my life, in all my travels, I have never been mistaken for a Bangladeshi, weirdly enough. And people, even when I say I'm Bangladeshi, people are like, you're what? Which I think is kind of weird, because I think I look perfectly Bangladeshi. But the two countries that I've most frequently been mistaken for is Nepal and the Philippines, and Nepal especially. So I've always felt very at home there, and when I am there, I've had situations where people speak to me in Nepali and then they're surprised when I can't answer. So the final story I'd like to leave you with is something that happened, thank you Saguna, something that happened to me many years ago on one of my first trips to Nepal as an adult. At that time, this is before, no, Archana, I think Hotmail is by far the best, by the way. It allows you to report things in a different way. I'm not a big Gmail fan. So anyway, I was at the airport, Kathmandu airport, and I love Nepal also because you allow visa on arrival, which is a very civilized system. So I prepared my visa on arrival form, and the Nepali guy who was directing us to the various queues, he said to me, no, why are you going in that queue? You come to this queue, which was the Nepali queue. I said, no, I am not Nepali. He said, where are you from then? What do you mean? Where's your passport? I said, Bangladeshi passport. And so then I showed him the passport. He said, why do you have a Bangladeshi passport? He's very alarmed. I said, I'm Bangladeshi. He said, your father is Bangladeshi? I said, yeah. Mother, yes. He said, your grandparents are Nepali? I said, no, nobody in my family is from Nepal. And he just would not believe me. So then at the end, he looked at me and he said, madam, when you go back to your country, please you talk to your parents, something they are not telling you. So I don't know if my parents didn't tell me, but whatever the case, I feel a very strong connection to your beautiful country. So I thank you for allowing me to be part of this session, and I hope that we will have other opportunities, perhaps in Kathmandu, perhaps online, perhaps some of you will come to the Dhaka Lit Fest sometime and we will meet there. But thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'll sign off now if Saguna gives me permission. The discussion is continuing, so I'm not sure quite what to do. Thank you very much, Indira. Yes. I never said, Sarita, I'm sorry, please don't put words into my mouth. I never said the author should not be provocative. I said the author should be genuine to what they want to write. If you want to write something, somebody may find that provocative. That does not mean you should not write it. I'm saying you should write your own story. Thank you so much, Keshav. You should write your own story in the way that is true to you and true to the character. You should not write it to be sensational, and you should not write it to be careful either. You should write it to be true. I have written stories that I know some people don't like. I have written stories where people have written to me and said, it's not like this, or this theme is not correct, or so on. So, I don't think that is my job. There's one particular story I wrote called Escaping the Mirror, which I know that people have reacted to quite strongly. I knew when I was writing it that people would react to it quite strongly because the theme is a very unpleasant one for us. We don't like to see ugliness in our own countries, in our own society, in our own families. And sometimes a writer's job is also to hold up that ugliness to society. So what I'm saying is, that is what you do if that is what your story is about. But you also know that there can be consequences. We make our own decisions about that. There's nothing that says a writer should not be provocative, especially in a world where you cannot decide what another person finds provocative. I hope that answers the question. Smita, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for attending. Thank you very much to all of you for taking the time out of busy schedules and attending. Saguna, are you going to come back on? Actually, there's a part 2 of that airport story. So since there's still some people around, I'll tell you the second part. I came out of there kind of like, oh, okay, that was the first time anyone told me I looked Nepali. So then I went into, at that time you all didn't have the scanning machine, for the baggage. So the baggage was checked manually, and the guy who checked the baggage was having a great time. He just unpacked everything, nothing very interesting, but they did that. And so then he went through it, and then he said something to me in Nepali, and sadly I don't understand. Sorry, I just got distracted by the comment. But anyway, I don't understand Nepali. So I said to him, I'm so sorry, I don't understand Nepali, but if you tell me in Hindi, I might understand if you say it in Hindi. And he said to me, he's very upset, and he said, you know what is wrong with your generation? I was probably about 25 at that point. He said, what's wrong with your generation? You can't speak your own language properly. You tell me to speak to you in Hindi because of Bollywood. And I was like, dude, chill. I speak my own language perfectly well. I was educated in my own language, but my own language is Bangla. So if you want to speak in Bangla, we can do that. But I can't speak in Nepali because I'm not from Nepal. And he was just not impressed. I don't know whether he felt I was actually lying to him or what. And the final part of that story is, subsequently when I've been to Nepal as a full grown up, so to speak, for the Ensel Lit Fest and so on, I discovered that again, as I'm saying, this is only some people's opinion. But then a friend who said, he said, yeah, you do look Nepali. And then he said, in fact, it's not just Nepali, you look Newari. So I don't know whether this is true or not. But then I spoke to another friend, this guy I just met, and he was from Kathmandu. And I said, it's funny, he also thought I was Nepali. So I said, it's funny people tell me that, but apparently there's even some group that I look like. And he said, yes, that's my group. Did they say Newari? I said, yes. So I don't know if that's true, but there you go. So thank you very much. Thank you, Sarita. I'm glad that you responded to that. I'm glad that I was able to explain it properly. So Guna, are you going to introduce us out? I'm very reluctant to leave while the discussion is still continuing, you see, so it seems rude. So let me think if there's anything else remotely interesting that I have. Oh yeah, some of the stories you can find online, for free to read. At least 4 or 5 stories are free to read online, so you don't have to buy the book for that. But yeah, Indra, I'm glad you liked it. No, it's just my nationality stories are just endless. I've had people coming up to me in London and speaking in Tagalog, which is the Filipino. Yeah, lots of. Listen, I gave you like a small part of the Nepal experiences. I have many more that go there. So I think maybe somewhere there's a collection of weird stories. Acha, Saguna, you're still angry. Okay. Silky Moon Ree, thank you very much. It would be lovely to see you next time I'm in Kathmandu. And we'll see if there's some opportunity for that, to meet you guys in person maybe. Fingers crossed. I will hope for that. I also hope that this coronavirus business comes to an end, or comes under control at some near date, so that I can actually go back and visit my second home sometime in the near future. Okay, friends like me in Nepal, meaning friends who look like me. I'm not in London, by the way, just so we're clear. I've lived in London for many years out of my life, but I'm not in London now, and I don't live in London now. I live in Bangladesh. So Indira, just to clarify. But I'm sure you have friends like me in London. I hope they're nice people. When you say friends like me, I mean. Okay. Saguna, thank you. So I'm glad that you're happy with the session. So then I'll say goodbye to you all for now. Thank you very, very much to everyone who's attended, and thank you very, very much to bOOkahOlics for making this possible, and Saguna for taking the initiative, and Ganesh and Mohit for spending so much time trying to sort out the tech issues. And when we couldn't sort them out, at least we found a solution that we can all live with. So take care of yourselves, be safe, be well, and I'll sign off for now then. Bye-bye.